Anti-abortion activists are taking aim at the Trump administration after the FDA approved a generic drug used in medication abortions. With FDA approval, activists say it will be easier to get abortion pills through the mail, despite laws in some states that aim to make that illegal. Joining me to discuss, Emily Brooks, congressional reporter here at The Hill. She is author of The Movement newsletter, which covers the influences and debates steering politics on the right here in Washington. Hi, Emily. So this is a generic drug for mifepristone, which is one of two drugs used in medication abortions. Why is the FDA approving a generic form of this drug such a big deal?
Well, these anti-abortion, pro-life activists, of course, have really turned to medication abortions, abortion pills, which are used in the majority of abortions now, particularly now that Roe v. Wade is overturned and a lot of states are making it very difficult or impossible for abortion clinics, those traditional type of abortion clinics that you think of, to operate. And this has really been front and center in the battle over abortion. And so, the Trump administration has done some things like reversing some, international guidance on abortion policy. But when it comes to this abortion pill, the FDA approving this generic version, even though this is the second generic version that has been approved, has really just incensed these activists, particularly because Health and Human Services has said that they are looking at doing a review of mifepristone, going back to see looking at the safety issues with it, something that these anti-abortion activists have really been pushing a lot for. So approving this generic version while at the same time they're doing that, it's just incredibly frustrating and a huge blow to the anti-abortion activists and their pro-life cause.
In many ways, Trump has delivered on pro-life issues. If you looked at the Supreme Court justices he has appointed, they were integral in overturning Roe v. Wade back in 2022. But the truth of the matter is that the number of abortions in the U.S. has gone up in 2023 and 2024. Do you think there is a sense of dissatisfaction on the part of activists that despite their wins, the number of abortions in the U.S. continues to rise?
Yeah, and that's exactly why they are looking at this medication abortion issue, and that's really the new frontier in the cause. And so you have these pills, which are, they're not only used for the purposes of abortion. They are used in some cases in early miscarriages to help that process along. But its use and how widespread it is becoming, even like being able to get abortion pills by mail, which is something that under the Biden administration, regulations really loosened that to make that much more accessible. That's something that these anti-abortion activists think should be easily reversed. And of course, this is a tricky issue for Republicans, even the ones who say that they are anti-abortion and pro-life, because it's not popular to have a total national abortion ban. They don't want to be seen as doing things on the federal level to hinder access to abortion. And Trump himself has said, let's just leave it to the states. But the counterpoint to that I'm hearing from these activists is that, this is a federal issue. This is federal regulations, FDA, especially for these pills, and state laws are also being violated or challenged when these pills are going across state lines. That's an issue that could come up in legal fights and perhaps all the way to the Supreme Court. We'll see. But it's really, was incredibly disappointing for them, especially having supported Republicans and supported President Trump and made sure that they could get unified control of government, to then, see that step back and their core issue happen.
As it pertains to this new generic mifepristone, what is it that the activists want here? They want the president to step in. Can he actually do that?
Yeah, so I think that's the question. So the response that we're hearing from HHS and from the White House is that, the administration's hands are kind of tied in a sense because of the getting a generic a pill approved, whether it's, or genetic medication, whether it's this pill or another. It's a pretty simple process, and they have to do it if it's the same as the brand name version. Another generic has already been approved. They don't have to have new safety. The person petitioning for a generic doesn't have to have new safety studies or showing outside studies showing that they could do that. But, the anti-abortion activists are kind of like saying, well, I don't really believe you. I think that you could have really stopped this if you wanted to, if Trump and the will between everything else that he's done and having such a strong executive control and kind of challenging the limits of executive authority in federal government. If he really wanted to, he probably could have delayed this or paused it or had some kind of rationale to not approve the generic. And so there has been a lot of, I think, skepticism of Secretary Kennedy in some of this because he is a former Democrat and not necessarily an anti-abortion, pro-life figure. And so I think what I heard from some of these activists is that they're looking to Trump himself to perhaps step in, provide some direction. He's not really necessarily an anti-abortion crusader himself, though, so to be determined if that would happen.
On this issue of mail-order abortion pills, correct me if I'm wrong, but what's actually happening here is in states where abortion is legal, providers are sending the pills across state lines into states where it's not illegal. Do activists think they can actually get at that and prevent that from happening and thus restrict the number of abortions that are happening more broadly across the country?
Well, that is what they're hoping to do. I mean, these state laws are really intended to prevent they don't want a doctor in another state or somebody else mailing these pills to somebody in their state. There's going to be, I think, a lot of legal challenges that go to that, but I think the next step on that's the legal track, and then there's the federal regulation track. And so the next step that these activists are looking in that sense is ensuring that this HHS review of mifepristone does move forward. What is the structure of it? How in-depth is the review going to go? And when is it going to come out? There are some people who are saying don't delay releasing this study or this review until after the midterm elections. Do it well before so we can actually see some progress and see that the administration is doing something. But there's a little bit of conflicting thoughts on that. There are also some anti-abortion activists who are saying, don't necessarily rush it. We want this to be as thorough as possible and perhaps be used to have a permanent change in federal approval for mifepristone or other anti-abortion pills or things of that nature. So a little bit of, are you going to put more pressure on the Trump administration, which you need to listen to you? And really, the Republicans are the only game in town for the anti-abortion activists in order to get any wins. Do you go and criticize them really hard in hopes that they will respond to that? Or do you just continue trying to, talk to them behind the scenes and not be as public with the criticism? That's what I think these activists are debating right now.
Do we have any idea of where President Trump comes down on this? I mean, he's never exactly been an anti-abortion crusader, has been pro-choice in the past. I assume would have some hesitation about enacting big changes to abortion policy ahead of next year's midterm elections. What's your take on the willingness of the president and also congressional leaders on the Republican side to have these big changes go through before the midterms?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that Speaker Johnson is a figure who is very, devout Christian, very sincere in his anti-abortion views. President Trump, however, not really the same. And I don't think a lot of the anti-abortion activists expect him to be, you know, and he says he's pro-life, but let's leave it to the states. I think that President Trump, after seeing the backlash from the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, doesn't really want this to be a detriment to Republicans in those midterm elections when those swing district Republicans and people trying to unseat Democrats in swing districts are going to have to face voters who might be worried about federal action on abortion. So it's a tricky line for them. But the question is, you know, does Trump respect or want to hold that social conservative anti-abortion part of his coalition together and make sure that they're happy and that they keep on helping Republicans in the future? I think that's maybe the thinking behind some of this criticism.
Yeah, difficult line to walk there, both appeasing the pro-life faction of the Republican Party while also not angering the majority of Americans who don't want full blockades on rights to abortion access in the country. We will continue, obviously, to follow this story. Very interesting insight. Thanks so much, Emily Brooks.
Thank you.